Welcome to this installment of supplemental lectures provided by PNC's Concurrent Enrollment Program. My name is Alexandra Kindle, and I will share some information with you that comes out of my History 151 course at Purdue University North Central. Today we will discuss some issues relating to women's rights and suffrage in the United States. Because the suffrage fight was so long, this is just part one of 3 lectures. The first 2 are within the period of the History 151 course as we teach it at Purdue, while Part 3 covers the period after Reconstruction, and I have put that with the History 152 lectures. In order to really understand the women's suffrage movement, we need to have a bit of an understanding about the time period and some of the changes. Some antebellum women faced great social change. As part of the nation began to urbanize, women's roles and economic status changed. Cities were marked by various economic changes, and middle and upper class women moved from producers to consumers. In rural areas, most women worked for the survival and comfort of their families. Yet in the cities, men became breadwinners, leaving their homes and wives behind to earn wages, the homemakers of the 19th century. This economic change brought about changes in ideas about women. Good women were marked by certain virtues, and you can see those there on the slide, that could be cultivated at home, the private sphere, while men went out into the dangerous vice-filled cities, the public sphere, to work. Much of these ideas were brought to our notice by historian Barbara Welter. There are many good websites that explain her ideas about the cult of true womanhood, also sometimes referred to as the cult of domesticity. Men and women in the 19th century helped to create these ideas. They were attempting to give meaning to the new gendered roles that women were taking in these. 3, 2, 1. Men and women in the 19th century helped to create these ideas. They were attempting to give meaning to the new gendered roles for middle and upper class women in urban areas. As the economies of the cities changed, so did ideas about men and women. On farms and small businesses, men and women worked together. But in emerging cities, homes and work were made distinct. Men's traditional responsibilities under coverture remained, while women lost their economic roles, leaving them with mostly social roles. In essence, men and women were seen as breadwinners and homemakers. And here on this graphic, I've given you a few key terms to help you understand separate spheres. Moreover, as middle-class women found themselves as the moral agents of society, they also had more free time, and some became concerned about the moral fiber of their communities and nation. There were other forces influencing women, but the result was a reform movement in the antebellum period. Women wanted in, and could argue their participation in the public sphere based on their roles as moral agents. Prostitution, slavery, and alcoholism hurt women and children and were social sins. But as women did the legwork for reform, they felt pushback from men who didn't mind women gathering signatures on petitions, but did mind women trying to speak up in meetings. Female reformers' frustration led to women considering their own rights. 300 men and women, especially from the ranks of abolitionists, met in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. On July 19 to 20, these men and women met in the Wesleyan Methodist Church. The remains of that church are pictured here, and they stand next to the Women's Rights National Historical Park Visitor Center. Seneca Falls was a convenient place to meet. First, it was in western New York, known for its religious fervor and new ideas. Radical Quakers lived in the area, and western New York was the birthplace of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Second, as you can see in the picture, canals connected western New York to other places, which led to better transportation for factory-made goods, such as those made in the mill across the road from the church, where folks met in 1848. It also was better transportation for moving people. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one of the reformers who felt the frustration mentioned before, drafted and read the Declaration of Sentiments to the attendees. Stanton, in this document, presented radical ideas about women's roles, considering American social and legal history. She even mentions Blackstone's commentaries, which had been the basis for coverture. Englishmen had brought these ideas to the colonies, and the Americans did not reject them in any of the founding documents or early American laws. In reading the entire document, you will see many influences from the radical ideals of abolitionists and Quakers. While slave owners considered their slaves as property and defended their ownership with the Constitution and American laws, abolitionists, of course, argued for their humanity. It was not hard for these people to take the leap for greater political and social freedoms for women. The issues of coverture and patriarchy are complex issues, but it was clear to women that they were not considered full citizens. The Quaker influence on reformers and the upstate New York region must be considered as well. Members of the Society of Friends believed in the equality of all humans due to their relationship to God, not laws. Quakers believed that all humans, male or female, American or African, had the inner light. Christians were not unequal in the sight of God, so they should not be unequal in the sight of man. Again, they could easily see how their efforts for abolition could be transformed to changing the conditions of women. Yet while these 300 men and women were willing to embrace these radical ideas, most Americans, men and women, were not. Throughout history, we can see that people were uncomfortable with change, especially social change. An article in the Oneida Whig, published soon after the convention, described the document as, quote, the most shocking and unnatural event ever recorded in the history of womanity, end quote. It is easy to imagine male opposition to this, but it is important to remember that coverture was maintained and redefined on a daily basis by both men and women. Some women were comfortable with their roles in separate spheres or in the cult of true womanhood because it helped them with the larger social structure, and the people supporting the women's rights movement, springing from Seneca Falls, was initially a small number. But it is clear to women's historians that in the late 1840s there was a small but vocal group of women who wanted to see at least some changes in the laws that favored husbands over wives. In New York, the state legislators passed the Married Women's Property Act, that's 1848, and some other, but not all states used this law as a model to pass their own laws in the 1850s. These laws did not undo coverture and patriarchy completely, but did allow women in some states to have more control over property brought to the marriage. The push for married women's property rights, along with the Seneca Falls Convention, demonstrate the beginning of the women's rights movement. While suffrage was one aspect of rights, this movement was more than just gaining the right to vote for women. So prior to the Civil War, it is more accurate to refer to the movement by calling it the women's rights movement, not the suffrage movement. But by the 1860s, things changed. Because of the war, the former male slaves got the constitutional right to vote, and the abolitionist movement died. Women reformers reorganized, and we will discuss their movement in the second part of this lecture. Women and their male supporters made a radical stand, but this was a moment that got lost because of larger national issues. With the end of the Mexican War, the issue of where slavery could or could not go sparked new tensions and possible war in 1850. For most of the 1850s, the nation was on the verge of war, and abolitionists, including women, focused on agitating for freeing the slaves. Your textbook should provide you with many of the details of events mentioned here. If you are interested in continuing the story, please see Part 2 located in the Civil War folder. And for now, I'd like to say thank you for joining me, and I hope that this lecture will help you in your studies. We all hope to see you at PNC when you are done with your high school degree.